I was 27 years old when the doors sealed. I had worked Line 17 of Manufactorum 66 Delta for 9 years by that point. 9 years of the same pattern, the same rhythm burned into muscle memory so deep I could perform my function while my mind wandered elsewhere. My hands knew the work without conscious thought. 3 seconds to position the component, a stamped metal housing for water purification valve assemblies. 2 seconds while the hydraulic press descended with its characteristic pneumatic hiss and the deep bass thud of impact. 1 second to clear the finished piece and reset for the next cycle. The pattern repeated 4,800 times per shift. 14 hours, starting at 600 hive standard. The temperature on the production floor held steady at 38 degrees Celsius year-round, maintained by the waste heat from 47 production lines operating in continuous rotation. The air inside the Manufactorum tasted of machine oil and ozone and the accumulated sweat of 800 workers breathing the same recycled atmosphere. The ventilation systems filtered particulates, but could do nothing about the organic chemistry of human bodies in enclosed space. After 9 years, I no longer noticed the smell consciously, but it was there, a constant baseline that defined the environment as completely as the orange industrial lighting or the vibration in the floor from the heavy machinery. I lived in Hab Block 77 Gamma, 3 kilometers from the Manufactorum through the transit tunnels that connected the Underhive's industrial sectors. The journey took 22 minutes at standard walking pace. My compartment was 4 meters by 3 meters, a single room with a fold-down cot, a storage locker, a sanitation unit, and a small cooking surface. I had shared this space with my father until he died from lung rot when I was 24. The Medicae servitor had classified his death as industrial attrition, acceptable parameters. The administratum's way of acknowledging that working in the Underhive's industrial zones for 43 years would eventually destroy your respiratory system, and this was considered a normal and expected outcome. After my father died, I lived alone. I cooked protein paste on the heating element, usually flavored with whatever chemical seasonings were available in the communal distribution center. I slept 6 hours between shifts when I could manage it, less when the transit tunnels were disrupted or when mandatory overtime extended the work period. I had no siblings. My mother had died during my birth. Complications the Medicae servitor logged as acceptable maternal mortality, standard parameters. I had no partnerships, no close associations beyond work relationships with other Line 17 operators. I existed in the narrow space between the Manufactorum and my Hab unit, a circuit I had walked for 9 years. I expected to walk it for another 30 or 40 years, until my body failed or the Manufactorum determined I was no longer productive enough to justify continued employment. I remember the sound when the war started. We were 4 hours into second shift, the floor operating at full capacity with all 47 lines running simultaneously, creating a wall of mechanical noise that was so constant it became almost like silence. Your brain learned to filter it out, to hear through it to the smaller sounds that indicated problems or required attention. I was positioning a component when the first explosion reached us. Not the sound itself initially, but the vibration, a deep, low-frequency pulse that traveled through the Manufacturum structure, through the rockcrete foundation and the steel support beams, up through the floor and into your bones. The heavy machinery stuttered. Several lines automatically shut down as their safety systems detected the abnormal vibration and interpreted it as mechanical failure. Then the sound arrived, a rolling percussion that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the Underhive's compressed architecture. Heavy weapons, autocannons or stubbers. The sustained fire pattern of a serious engagement, not the brief bursts of gang skirmishes or the occasional enforcement action by local Arbeits. This was warfare at scale. The sound continued for 17 minutes by my count. Then it stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt wrong, that made the return of the Manufactorum's normal operating noise seem almost comforting. The shift supervisor was a man named Aurel Vandus. He had worked Manufactorum 66 Delta for 36 years, starting as a line operator and working his way up through maintenance and quality control to shift supervisor. He was 58 years old, broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested he had been physically powerful before age and industrial work had worn him down to wire and gristle. He stood on the inspection platform overlooking the main floor and told us to continue operation. His voice carried across the machinery through the Vox amplification system. "Whatever is occurring in the surrounding sectors is not our concern," he said. "The Administratum will handle external security matters. Our function is production. Line supervisors, verify your quotas. All personnel, return to stations." We returned to our stations. Line 17 resumed operation. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The pattern held. I worked another 6 hours before the shift change. The explosions had not returned. I began to think it had been an isolated incident, something that would be processed and forgotten, absorbed into the background noise of Underhive existence where violence was common enough to be unremarkable. The shift change occurred at 2000 Hive Standard. Third shift workers assembled at the primary entrance, while second shift completed final production cycles and prepared to hand over stations. The primary entrance was a massive blast door, 3 meters thick and 6 meters high, designed to seal the Manufactorum in case of industrial accidents or atmospheric breaches in the surrounding Underhive sector. I had never seen it closed. It had stood open for the entire 9 years I had worked there, a permanent portal between the Manufactorum and the external corridors. At 2014 Hive Standard, the blast door sealed. The sound was immediate and unmistakable. Warning klaxons, the pneumatic release of locking mechanisms, the deep grinding of motors that had not engaged in years or possibly decades. The door closed in 40 seconds, 3 meters of reinforced ceramite and steel sliding into place with mechanical inevitability. The klaxons cut off. The silence that followed was total, broken only by the background hum of the Manufactorum's systems and the confused voices of 843 workers trying to understand what had just occurred. The third shift workers who had been waiting to enter were sealed outside. The second shift workers who should have been leaving were sealed inside. The blast door's interior panel showed red status indicators. Sealed, locked, requiring command authorization to open. Aurel tried the manual override. The panel rejected his credentials with a harsh negative tone. He tried the Vox system, attempting to contact Administratum oversight. No response. He tried the emergency channels. Static. We stood looking at the sealed door for 40 minutes. Some workers approached it, placing hands against the metal as if physical contact might provide information that Observation could not. Others sat on the floor, conserving energy, waiting for the situation to resolve. No one panicked. Panic was not productive. We were industrial workers, trained through years of repetition to accept disruption calmly and wait for supervisors to provide direction. Aurel eventually ordered everyone back to stations. Third shift would extend a second shift. We would continue operation until the door opened. Production could not stop because of administrative errors or security protocols. The Manufactorum required continuous function. I worked another 14 hours. My body was familiar with this. Mandatory overtime was common enough that extended shifts were uncomfortable but manageable. At 34 hours into my continuous operation, Aurel finally authorized rest rotation. Half the workers would rest for 4 hours, while the other half maintained essential operations. I was in the first rest group. I found a space on the floor in one of the storage areas, used my work coat as a pillow, and slept for 3 hours and 40 minutes before the noise woke me. Explosions. Closer this time, the vibration strong enough that loose components rattled in their storage bins. I lay on the floor counting the seconds between impacts, trying to estimate distance. The fighting was perhaps 2 kilometers away, maybe less. The engagement lasted 90 minutes, then silence again. I learned what was happening on day 3. The term day had become arbitrary. We no longer experienced the normal cycle of shifts and rest periods. Time had compressed into continuous operation, interrupted by brief rest rotations. But we tracked it anyway, maintaining the calendar as a way of marking progression, as evidence that we had not lost all structure. Aurel gathered everyone on the main floor for assembly. 843 workers stood in formation between the production lines while he spoke from the inspection platform. His voice was level, controlled, delivering information without emotional loading. A gang war has erupted in the surrounding sectors. He said, the major houses, Goliath and Orlok, based on Vox fragments we've intercepted, have gone to war over territory and salvage rights. This Manufactorum is positioned in the center of their disputed zone, approximately 5 kilometers of Underhive structure in every direction is now active combat area. The gangs have sealed all major exits to prevent enemy movement through industrial facilities. We cannot leave. We do not know when we will be able to leave. Someone in the crowd asked how long the war would last. Aurel did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news. Gang wars in the Underhive typically resolve within weeks to months, occasionally longer. We have supplies for approximately 6 weeks at current consumption rates. However, I've received Vox communication from both gang factions. They require continued operation of this facility. We produce components for water purification systems that service the entire sector. Both sides need our output to maintain their territory's habitability. They will provide supplies in exchange for continued production. Another voice from the crowd. So we're hostages. We are workers, Aurel said. We will continue our function. We will maintain production. We will survive until the Administratum restores order. Line supervisors implement continuous operation protocols. All personnel prepare for extended operational period. We continued production. The Manufactorum operated on 3 shifts covering 22 hours daily, with 2 hours allocated to maintenance and mechanical servicing. 843 workers rotated through rest periods and active operation in a pattern designed to maximize productivity while preventing complete physical breakdown. We had stored supplies, protein paste in sealed containers rated for 5-year shelf life, water in massive holding tanks that serviced the Manufacturum's cooling systems and human consumption, medical supplies in the facility's small medici station, machine parts and lubricants and raw materials for production. We had the Manufactorum itself, a structure 30 meters high and 200 meters on each side, containing 47 production lines, maintenance workshops, storage areas, administrative offices, a small medici bay, and a communal rest area that had previously been used only for brief breaks between shifts. We had power from the Underhive's main grid, which continued to function because the gangs needed it as much as we did. We had recycled air from the atmospheric processes, machines that filtered and oxygenated the enclosed environment. We had everything required for industrial operation. We did not have freedom to leave. We did not have natural light. We did not have space to move beyond the narrow corridors between machines. We did not have privacy or silence, or any of the things that made human existence tolerable beyond mere survival. The first death occurred on day 11. A worker named Henrik Vrel collapsed at his station on line 9. He simply stopped functioning mid-cycle, his hands releasing the component he had been positioning, his body folding to the floor with a loose-limbed collapse that indicated complete system failure. The medici servitor attended within 90 seconds, performing diagnostic scans and attempting resuscitation. The servitor's monotone voice declared the result: cardiac arrest, stress-induced, subject deceased at 11:47 Hive Standard, day 11 of containment. Henrik was 42 years old. He had worked the Manufactorum for 26 years. He had never missed a shift in all that time. The medici's servitor's report noted that his cardiovascular system had been degrading for years, the cumulative effect of industrial labor and poor nutrition, and the genetic predisposition toward heart disease that was common in Underhive populations. The containment stress had simply accelerated the inevitable outcome. We placed his body in cold storage, a refrigerated unit normally used for temperature-sensitive components and chemical compounds. The unit held temperatures at -12 degrees Celsius, sufficient to prevent decomposition. Orel sent Vox communication to both gang factions requesting permission to remove the body for proper disposal, according to administratum guidelines. Neither gang responded. We continued adding bodies to cold storage. By week 3, we had established new patterns. The gangs sent supplies through a single loading bay on the Manufacturum's eastern wall, a door that could be opened remotely from outside but not from inside. We could receive deliveries but could not exit through the opening. Food paste in bulk containers, water in sealed drums, ammunition and power cells for the 6 Arbeits enforcers who had been trapped with us when the doors sealed. 6 men who maintained nominal authority, but had no means to enforce it beyond their laser guns and the willingness of workers to accept their commands. We sent finished components through the same loading bay: valve housings, pressure regulators, filter assemblies, parts that were critical for maintaining water purification systems across the entire sector. The gangs needed these components more than they needed to kill each other immediately. We were useful. Usefulness kept us alive. The psychological adjustment occurred gradually. For the first week, workers remained convinced the situation was temporary, that the doors would open within days and we would return to normal operations. By week 2, that certainty had eroded. By week 3, we had accepted that we were imprisoned for an unknown duration, and the only rational response was to adapt. We established routines. We created small spaces of personal territory in the communal rest areas, marking them with work coats or personal items. We formed informal social groups, workers clustering with others from their production lines or their heb blocks. We learned to sleep through the noise of continuous operation, to eat without appetite, to function without hope of immediate relief. I was in the water distribution area on day 27 when I met him. Water was rationed at 2 liters per day per worker, collected from a central tank at scheduled intervals. The distribution system was simple, a manual pump connected to the main tank, workers filling personal containers under supervision to ensure equitable allocation. The line moved slowly, perhaps 3 workers per minute, which meant wait times of up to 2 hours during peak distribution periods. He was ahead of me in line. I had noticed him before during shift changes. A younger worker, perhaps 23 or 24, with the kind of thin build that suggested childhood malnutrition that his body had never fully recovered from. His hands were scarred from industrial accidents, missing the last joint of his left index finger from what looked like a shearing injury. He wore the same grey work coverall that all Manufactorum workers wore, stained with machine oil and faded from repeated cleaning. He filled his container from the pump, the water flowing slowly, taking perhaps 30 seconds to reach the 2-liter mark. He turned to leave, and his foot caught on an uneven floor plate. He stumbled. The container fell from his hands, hit the floor and cracked along a seam that had weakened from repeated use. 2 liters of water spread across the floor, flowing toward the drainage grate. He stood looking at it for perhaps 5 seconds. The water continued flowing, disappearing into the drainage system. Workers behind us in line said nothing. Everyone understood the situation. Water was rationed. Spilled water was lost. There were no second allocations, no exceptions for accidents. If you lost your daily water, you went without until the next distribution period 24 hours later. I tilted my container and poured half its contents into his cracked container, working carefully to avoid spilling more. 1 liter. He looked at me with an expression I could not fully interpret, something between gratitude and confusion. "You'll be short," he said. His voice was hoarse, probably from dehydration. "I'll manage." "That's not—" He stopped. "I'm Davan, line 12. "I know." I did not know. I'd not known his name or his line assignment before that moment. The response was automatic, a way of acknowledging his introduction without admitting ignorance. He nodded once, accepting this. "What's your name?" I told him. The name I had carried for 27 years, that my father had given me at birth. The name that would later become irrelevant, compressed into designation and function until the original label was lost. "Line 17? "Yes." He looked at the water in his cracked container. "I'll pay this back. Next distribution, I'll give you half of mine." "That's not necessary." "It is to me." He walked away, moving carefully to avoid spilling the water I had given him. I filled my container with the remaining allotment, 1 liter instead of 2, and returned to my rest area. 1 liter was sufficient. The human body could function on minimal hydration for extended periods. I had made a practical decision to prevent a fellow worker from experiencing dehydration stress that would reduce his productivity. The Manufactorum required all workers to maintain function. This was simple operational logic. I told myself this. I did not examine why I had acted without calculation, without considering my own resource needs first. Analysis would have revealed motivations I was not prepared to acknowledge. I noticed him after that, during shift changes, in the communal rest area, at the water distribution line. Davan moved differently than other workers. Most of us had settled into mechanical patterns after weeks of containment, performing our functions with minimal thought, conserving energy, maintaining only the necessary level of engagement. Davan still looked around. He observed. He noticed when machines required maintenance before they failed. He helped other workers without being asked, steadying them when they stumbled from fatigue, sharing food with those who had depleted their rations before the next distribution. These behaviors were statistically unusual. In an environment of enforced scarcity, most workers became protective of their resources, limiting social interaction to reduce energy expenditure. Davan's continued engagement suggested either psychological resilience or inability to adapt to the reality of our situation. I found myself uncertain which interpretation was accurate. I found myself watching him to determine the answer. He approached me on day 34. I was in the maintenance workshop attempting to repair my work gloves, which had worn through at the palm from repeated contact with metal components. The material was synthetic fiber, designed for durability but not for the level of continuous use we were experiencing. I was attempting to patch the worn area with adhesive sealant when Davan sat on the workbench beside me. "You're line 17, he said. "Not a question. Confirmation." "Yes." "You've been here 9 years. Since before the war." "Yes." "Do you think they'll let us out?" I considered the question. The war showed no signs of resolution. The Vox channels we could intercept suggested continued fighting, continued casualties, neither side gaining decisive advantage. Eventually? How long is eventually? I don't know. He watched me work for a moment, his attention focused on my hands, applying the sealant. "I had a brother," he said. "Older. He worked the transit tunnels. Maintenance crew. He was out there when the doors sealed. In the tunnels somewhere. I don't know if he's alive. The fighting, he stopped. I don't know if I'll ever find out." I did not know what response was appropriate. Comfort required optimism I did not possess. I continued working on my gloves. "Do you have family outside?" he asked. "No. My father died 3 years ago. Lung rot. I have no siblings, no extended family that I'm aware of." "So everyone you know is in here?" "Yes. Me too. Besides my brother. Everyone I know is locked in with me." He was quiet for a moment. "I guess that makes it easier. Or harder. I'm not sure which." "Both," I said. He smiled slightly. It was the first time I'd seen anyone smile in weeks. "Thanks for the water before. I would have been in bad shape without it. You would have survived." "Maybe. But it would have been worse. So thanks." He left. I finished repairing my gloves and returned them to my workstation. My hands were shaking slightly. I attributed this to fatigue and inadequate nutrition. I did not examine other possible causes. The war continued outside. We heard it constantly now, our ears attuned to the frequencies of violence. Weapons fire, explosions, the groan and crash of structural collapse. The sounds that reached us were muted by the Manufactorum's thick walls, reduced to bass vibrations and occasional sharp reports when something exploded close enough to rattle equipment. We learned to work through it. The sounds became background data, environmental conditions that required no response beyond continued operation. By week 7, 14 workers had died. Heart failure, industrial accidents, one case of violence when 2 workers fought over a disputed ration allocation, and one died from head trauma after falling against a machine housing. We logged the deaths in the Manufactorum's administrative records, maintained by a servitor that continued its data processing function with mechanical consistency. We stored the bodies. We continued. I found myself spending more time near Davan. This was not a conscious decision initially. I simply noticed that when I entered the communal rest area, I looked for where he was positioned. When I collected my water ration, I adjusted my timing to coincide with his distribution period. When he spoke, I listened with attention I did not extend to other workers. He told me about his childhood in the upper Hab blocks, before his family accumulated debt and descended to the Underhive seeking cheaper habitation and employment. He described seeing the sky from the upper levels, a concept I struggled to understand. I had been born in the Underhive and had never traveled to the surface levels. He said the sky was sometimes blue, sometimes gray, sometimes orange at the hours when the sun rose or set. He said sunlight was different from artificial light, that it was white rather than orange-yellow, that it created warmth on exposed skin in a way that industrial heating could not replicate. I logged these descriptions with fascination. I had no framework for understanding most of what he described, but I retained the information anyway, storing it as data about a world that existed somewhere above the compressed layers of the hive. He asked about my work, about the specific components I produced on line 17, about how the hydraulic press functioned, what tolerances it maintained, what failure modes I monitored. His questions suggested genuine curiosity rather than social performance. I explained the mechanical systems in detail, describing the hydraulic pressure cycle, the force calculations, the quality control metrics. He understood quickly. He asked follow-up questions that demonstrated real comprehension, that extended the conversation beyond surface explanation into the underlying principles. I had not experienced intellectual engagement in years, perhaps ever. Work was mechanical. Social interaction was typically transactional. Davan's questions created something different, a form of connection I lacked vocabulary to properly describe. On day 53, I realized I had been seeking his presence deliberately, that I was adjusting my routines to maximize contact. This recognition created significant discomfort. Attachment was inefficient in an environment where death occurred regularly and resources were scarce. Forming connections created vulnerability. If Davan died, when Davan died, because everyone died eventually, the statistical certainty of mortality applied equally to everyone. His death would impact my psychological stability, would reduce my operational effectiveness. The logical response was to reduce contact, to maintain professional distance, to protect myself from the inevitable loss. I attempted to implement this strategy. For 3 days, I avoided the areas where Davan typically spent his personal time. I adjusted my water distribution timing to miss him. I did not seek him out during shift changes. He noticed. On day 56, he found me in a maintenance corridor I used to avoid the more crowded thoroughfares between production areas. He stood blocking my path until I acknowledged him. "Did I do something?" he asked. "No. You're avoiding me." I did not have a prepared response. The truth was too complex to articulate, required admitting things I had not fully processed. "I don't want," I stopped. Started again. "Attachment is dangerous here. More dangerous than being alone. Yes. If you die, it will affect my function." He was quiet for several seconds. "Then, I'm already attached to you. Happens whether you participate or not. At least if you participate, we both get something from it before—" He stopped. "Before whatever happens, happens." He was correct. The attachment existed regardless of my acknowledgement. Denying it served no practical purpose except to eliminate the positive aspects while retaining all vulnerability to loss. The logical conclusion was to accept the attachment and extract whatever value it provided while both of us remained alive. "Line 17, he said. Not a question. Confirmation that we would continue interacting. "Line 17, I agreed. We resumed regular contact. I stopped attempting to calculate whether this was rationale. Rationality had limited application to human behavior. I accepted that Davan mattered to me in ways that transcended operational logic, and I chose to allow this to continue. The war entered its 4th month. The gang factions showed no signs of resolution. The Vox channels carried threats, demands, occasional negotiations that broke down within hours. Both sides had committed too much to withdraw. Pride and casualty counts created momentum toward continued conflict rather than settlement. We received supplies irregularly now. Sometimes the loading bay would open daily, sometimes not for 5 days. The gangs were experiencing their own resource shortages, and we were not their priority. We began rationing more severely. Food allocation dropped to 1,200 calories per day. Water to 1.5 liters. Workers began showing signs of malnutrition, weight loss, muscle wasting, reduced cognitive function. I was 58 kilograms by day 100. I had weighed 71 kilograms when the doors sealed. My body was consuming itself, converting muscle and fat into energy to maintain basic function. I felt this in the weakness of my grip, in the way stairs required significant effort, in how my vision occasionally darkened at the edges when I stood too quickly. Davan was worse. His thin build had minimal reserves. By day 110, he was moving with visible difficulty. His coordination degraded, his speech occasionally slurred from low blood sugar. I increased his rations by sharing more of mine. This was not sustainable. We were both deteriorating, just at different rates. But I could not watch him fail, while I retained marginally more resources. He protested when he realized what I was doing. We were in the rest area, both of us lying on the floor because sitting required energy expenditure we could not afford. I had given him 2/3 of my food ration, keeping only 1/3 for myself. "You can't keep doing this," he said. "I'm managing. You collapsed at your station yesterday. Aurel told me you blacked out for 30 seconds. Momentary blood pressure issue. I recovered. You're dying to keep me alive. The calculation? There's no calculation." His voice was sharp, carrying an edge I had not heard before. "You're doing it because you want to, because I matter to you." I did not deny this. Denial would have been inaccurate. "We split even," he said. "Equal rations. Both of us last longer that way." "The mathematics suggest—" "I don't care what the mathematics suggest. Equal rations, or I refuse to eat entirely. Choose." I chose equal rations. We both began deteriorating at accelerated rates, but we deteriorated together. This was irrational. This was also what I needed. Shift Supervisor. Aurel implemented population control protocols on day 142. He announced this during mandatory assembly, his voice carrying across the main floor through the Vox system. 804 workers stood listening. We had lost 39 to death at that point. "Resource consumption exceeds supply delivery," Aurel said. "We must reduce population to sustainable levels. Food rations will decrease by 30%, water by 20%. Medical supplies will be reserved for critical workers only. Some of you will die. This is necessary for group survival. The strong will persist. The weak will not. This is the Emperor's will. This is how humanity survives." No one protested. Protest required energy and optimism, neither of which remained. We returned to our stations. Production continued. Workers began dying at increased rates. Davan's health deteriorated rapidly after the ration reduction. His body had no reserves left. By day 150, he could barely maintain his station on line 12. I observed him during shift change, watching his hands shake as he attempted to position components, watching him lean against the machine housing for support. I continued sharing my rations despite the reduction. I gave him more than half, keeping only what was absolutely necessary to maintain minimal function. My body was 41 kilograms now. I had lost 30 kilograms. My muscle mass was severely depleted. My cognitive function was degraded. I noticed lapses in memory, difficulty with calculations that should have been simple, extended time required to process basic information. On day 158, I collapsed during my shift and did not recover consciousness for 6 hours. The Medicae servitor's report noted severe malnutrition, dehydration, blood pressure at critical low levels. I woke in the Medicae bay with Davan sitting beside me. "You have to stop," he said. "I'm functional." "You're dying. You'll be dead in a week at this rate." "Acceptable timeline." "It's not acceptable to me." He leaned forward. His face was close enough that I could see the details, the scar through his left eyebrow from some childhood injury, the exact shade of his eyes, which were brown with small flecks of amber near the iris, the way his mouth pulled slightly to one side when he was experiencing strong emotion. "Equal rations. Starting now. That's the rule. If you break it, I break it. Both of us eat properly, or neither of us eats at all." I agreed. The alternative was watching him die faster while I died slower. Neither outcome was acceptable. We both deteriorated, but the deterioration stabilized at sustainable rates. We would not die immediately. We would die slowly, along with everyone else trapped inside the Manufactorum as the war continued without resolution. On day 203, a child was born inside the Manufactorum. A worker named Torvis Kell had a partner named Marin who had been pregnant when the doors sealed. The pregnancy had progressed through all 7 months of our containment. The birth occurred in the Medicae bay, delivered by a worker named Garvins who had basic Medicae training from his previous employment. The labor lasted 11 hours. The child was born at 3:22 Hive Standard. a son, underweight but alive. Torvus named him Keller. The child's cries echoed across the main floor during the birth and for hours afterward. The sound was jarring. We had adapted to machinery noise, to weapons fire, to the sounds of industrial operation and distant warfare. The sound of an infant was alien, wrong. It did not belong in the Manufactorum. It suggested future, continuity, hope, concepts that felt increasingly abstract. Davan visited the child at the Medici Bay on day 205. I accompanied him. We stood looking at the infant through the observation window. Keller was small, perhaps 3 kilograms, his skin red and wrinkled, his hands moving in uncoordinated gestures. He was asleep, his breathing creating small movements visible even from distance. "He'll never see the sun," Davan said. His voice was flat, affect removed. "Statistically unlikely," I agreed. "If we don't get out, he'll grow up in here. He'll think this is what life is. Machines and rations and locked doors. He'll never know there's anything else." Yes, that's wrong. Wrong is not a useful analytical category. It's simply what is occurring. He turned to look at me. "When did you stop being angry about this?" The question was unexpected. I processed it carefully, attempting to identify when anger had ceased to be part of my emotional baseline. I could not locate a specific moment. It had faded gradually, eroded by months of unchanging circumstances, until it simply no longer existed as accessible emotion. "I don't know," I said. "I'm still angry. Every single day I'm angry about this, about being locked in here, about that child being born into this, about—" He stopped. "I think being angry means I'm still human. I think when you stop being angry, you've become just a component, just another machine running until it breaks." I did not know how to respond to this. I did not know if my lack of anger meant I had lost some essential quality of humanity. I did not want to examine that question too closely. Year 1 ended. The war continued. By day 398, we had lost 81 workers to death. 762 remained. 3 more children had been born. Partnerships had formed among workers seeking psychological stability through connection. The Manufactorum had become not just a workplace, but a complete enclosed society, developing its own social structures and relationship patterns. Davan and I were not partners in the formal sense. We did not share living space or resources beyond what I have already described. But we were something. A connection that lacked proper vocabulary. We spent our personal time together. We talked when energy permitted. We existed in proximity, and that proximity was necessary for both of us in ways that transcended practical consideration. On day 419, Davan became ill. The symptoms began with mild fever, progressed to severe respiratory distress within 18 hours. The Medici servitor diagnosed bacterial pneumonia, likely contracted from the Manufactorum's degrading air filtration systems, which had not received proper maintenance in months. Treatment required antibiotics from our medical supplies. Shift supervisor. Aurel made the resource allocation decision. Medical supplies were reserved for critical workers, those whose skills could not be easily replaced or whose positions were essential for continued operation. Davan was Line 12. Line 12 could be covered by redistributing personnel. He would not receive treatment. I went to Aurel's office during my personal hours on day 420. The office was a small room on the second level, overlooking the main production floor. Aurel sat behind a desk covered in data slates and production reports. "I'm requesting medical supply allocation for Davan, line 12, I said. "Request denied. You know the protocols." "I'm offering to trade my rations for the antibiotics." "Rations cannot be traded for medical supplies. That would establish precedent that would destroy our entire resource allocation system. Every worker would attempt similar trades, creating chaos in distribution logistics. I'll work double shifts, additional production to offset the resource cost. We don't need additional production. We need workers to survive long enough to maintain current quotas. Your proposal is rejected." I attempted other arguments. All were rejected with the same logical consistency. The Manufacturum's resource allocation was based on survival math. Davan's life had less value than the antibiotics required to save it. This was rational. This was how systems functioned when resources were scarce. I returned to where Davan was isolated in a corner of the Medicaid bay. His fever was 40 degrees Celsius. His breathing was labored, each breath requiring visible effort. I sat beside him on the floor. "You tried," he said. His voice was weak, each word costing energy he did not have. It was insufficient. The math finally caught up, right? I'm not worth the resources. That's not... I stopped. It was exactly that. The system had calculated his value against the cost of treatment and determined the cost was too high. This was rational decision-making under resource scarcity. I hated it with intensity that surprised me. I had not realized I retained capacity for hatred at this magnitude. "I'm glad I knew you," Davan said. "I'm glad you shared the water that first time. Everything after that. I don't regret any of it. You're not dying yet." Even as I said this, I knew it was false optimism. "I'm dying. We both know it." He reached for my hand. His skin was hot, dry, the fever consuming him. "Don't let this make you like them. Don't let it make you just a function. Promise me." "I've been just a function for years." "No, you haven't been. You gave me water. You shared your rations. You're here now when you should be resting. That's not function. That's still human. Stay human." His fever increased to 41 degrees Celsius on day 421. He became delirious, talking to his brother, describing things he was seeing that were not present. I stayed beside him, holding his hand, listening to him talk to people who were not there. My shift went uncovered. The Manufactorum continued operation without me. On day 422, at approximately 1400 hours Hive Standard, Davan's breathing changed. The rhythm became irregular, the gaps between breaths extending from seconds to many seconds. I watched this occur in real time, my mind cataloging the progression with clinical detachment, while something else inside me was breaking. I held his hand, and I counted the seconds between breaths. 15 seconds. 20. 23. His chest rose once more, fell, and did not rise again. I sat beside him watching for additional movement, waiting for his chest to rise again even though I understood that it would not. The Medici servitor arrived after 40 minutes, alerted by some monitoring system. It performed diagnostic scans, confirmed cessation of cardiac and respiratory function, logged the official data. Davan Terek, line 12 operator, deceased day 422 at 1427, Hive Standard. Cause of death respiratory failure, secondary to untreated bacterial pneumonia. The servitor asked if I required psychological support services. I said no. The servitor removed Davan's body to cold storage, where it would be kept until we could dispose of our dead properly. I returned to line 17. The hydraulic press required operation. Production quotas needed to be met. I positioned components. The press descended. I cleared and reset. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The pattern held even though the person who had given that pattern meaning was gone. I worked my full shift, 14 hours without break. When the shift ended, I went to my designated rest space. I lay on the floor and I did not sleep. I looked at the ceiling and I counted the rivets in the support beams. There were 247 visible from my position. I had never counted them before. I counted them again. The number remained constant. Some things did not change even when everything else had. Davan was dead. This fact did not change no matter how many times I processed it. He had died because the Manufacturum's resource calculations had determined his life was worth less than the antibiotics that would have saved him. I'd been unable to alter that calculation despite wanting to with intensity that felt like physical pain. I had failed him. This was data I could not process away. The war continued. I stopped tracking time in days. The number had grown too large, too abstract. I tracked in shifts instead. Shifts were discrete units. I could count shifts. I worked shift after shift after shift. The pattern held. Year 2, Year 3. The war showed no signs of ending. Both gangs had suffered catastrophic casualties, but neither would negotiate settlement. Pride and sunk costs created momentum toward continuation. The Manufactorum remained useful to both sides. We remained imprisoned. By year 5, I no longer remembered my father's face clearly. I tried to recall it and found only approximate shapes, details that might have been accurate or might have been reconstructed from fragments. Davan's face I remembered perfectly. Every detail remained crystalline. The scar through his eyebrow, the amber flecks in his eyes, the way his mouth moved when he spoke. I could reproduce his face from memory with accuracy that felt pathological. I did not want to remember him this clearly. The clarity made his absence more precise, more permanently painful. The children born during containment began reaching working age. Keller, the first child born after the doors sealed, started training on Line 8 at age 12. He was small for his age, malnourished despite resource allocation that prioritized growing children. He learned quickly. He adapted to the work without complaint. He had never known any other existence. I observed him during shift changes and rest periods. He reminded me of Davan in subtle ways, the way he looked around, the way he noticed things other workers ignored, the way he helped others without being asked. These similarities created discomfort. I avoided direct interaction. Keller approached me on shift 6247. I was performing maintenance on Line 17's hydraulic system when he appeared in the maintenance workshop doorway. "You knew Davan," he said. Not a question. "Yes. My father told me about him. Said you were—" He paused, searching for appropriate terminology. "Said you were together, partners. We shared resources and time. He died because they wouldn't give him medicine." "That's accurate." Keller moved closer, watching me work. "Was it worth it? Knowing him if you knew he'd die anyway?" I considered the question. Worth implied calculation, cost-benefit analysis applied to human connection. I don't know. Would you do it again if you could go back? I don't know that either. He nodded as if this answer satisfied some requirement. I wanted to know what he was like. My father said Davan talked about the sun, about his brother, about things outside. He did. Did he think we'd get out eventually? At first. Later, no. Do you think we'll get out? I looked at this child who had never seen the sun, never experienced anything beyond the Manufacturum's walls. Eventually. Yes. How long is eventually? The question was identical to one Davan had asked during our first real conversation early in the containment. The repetition created physical discomfort, triggered memory so sharp it felt like injury. I don't know, I said. Keller thanked me and left. I completed the maintenance work, but my hands were shaking, making the precise work difficult. I began to notice Keller after that interaction, despite my intention to maintain distance. The way he helped younger children learn their stations. The way he distributed his rations to workers who were struggling. The way he sometimes stood looking at the sealed doors with an expression that suggested he was imagining what existed beyond them. He was too much like Davan. This made him dangerous to my psychological stability. I attempted to maintain distance. I failed. Connection formed whether I participated or not. On shift 7013, a catastrophic accident occurred on Line 4. A worker named Brennick Halls had his arm caught in the compression mechanism. The machine's safety systems, degraded from years without proper maintenance, failed to disengage. His arm was crushed to the shoulder before another worker could manually shut down the line. Brennick survived the initial trauma, but died 11 hours later from blood loss and shock. Our medical supplies were too depleted to treat traumatic injuries of that severity. Keller witnessed the accident from the adjacent line. I observed him during the aftermath, standing motionless while other workers cleaned blood from Line 4's mechanism. His expression was completely blank, affect removed, the shutdown response that occurred when the mind encountered input it could not integrate. I approached him during the rest period following the incident. You need to process what you witnessed, I said. He looked at me without recognition for several seconds. Then awareness returned. Process what? The death. If you don't process it, it accumulates. Eventually you stop being able to function. You seemed to function fine. I stopped processing after Davan died. It was an error. Don't replicate my errors. He was silent. Then, how do you process someone dying in a machine? You acknowledge that it occurred. You identify what you feel about it. You continue anyway because continuing is all that's available. What if I don't feel anything? Then you've already stopped processing. That's a different problem with worse outcomes. He laughed, the sound bitter and wrong. I don't want to end up like you. No offense intended. None taken. Ending up like me is contraindicated for psychological health. Despite this conversation, I continued to notice Keller. Continued to monitor his well-being, to ensure he was managing, to verify he was not deteriorating. This was attachment. I recognized it as such. I did not stop. Some patterns repeat regardless of their outcomes. Year 7. Year 8. The war became permanent background condition. We no longer conceptualized it as temporary situation. This was simply existence now. Work, rations, rest. The pattern repeated until it would stop. The first generation of Manufacturum-born children reached adulthood. Keller was 19. He had never lived anywhere except inside these walls. His entire worldview was shaped by industrial operation and resource scarcity. I decided to teach him what Davan had taught me. This served no practical purpose, but I did it anyway. I found him during a rest period. Davan told me about the sun, I said. What about it? I want to tell you what he told me, so someone who's never seen it knows what it is. Why? Because forgetting it exists seems like surrender. I repeated everything Davan had told me. Light that was white, heat that felt alive, shadows that moved. Keller listened. Other workers began listening. The stories became communal property, mythology about a world most of us would never see. By year 12, the war had transformed into frozen stalemate. Both gangs were too depleted to fight effectively, but too committed to negotiate settlement. We continued production because we had always continued production. The system persisted through momentum. Keller formed a partnership at 26. They had a child. They named him Davan. When Keller told me the name, I experienced emotion I had not felt in years. Something between grief and gratitude. Thank you, I said. He mattered to you. That means he should be remembered. I agreed to tell the child about his namesake when he was old enough to understand. I did not mention that I would likely be dead by then. Year 20. Year 30. Time became cyclical rather than linear. The same patterns repeated endlessly. By year 40, I was 107 years old. I should have died decades earlier. I persisted through biological improbability, through sheer refusal to die before witnessing resolution. The doors opened on day 14,673. The sound was immediate and unmistakable. The hydraulics engaging, the motors grinding, the slow opening of metal that had not moved in 40 years. Every worker stopped mid-function. 812 individuals stood motionless, listening to the sound of the outside world returning. Light from the external corridors spilled in. Air from outside mixed with our recycled atmosphere. Arbits entered, weapons ready, followed by Manufacturum officials already cataloguing what they found. An official approached Aurel and requested status report. Aurel provided numbers. 812 survivors, 114 born during containment, production maintained throughout. 0 defection attempts, complete operational continuity. The official logged this data without reaction. The gang war ended 6 years ago. This facility was marked as destroyed in administrative records. We discovered the error during recent survey. You will be processed for reintegration. 6 years. We had been locked inside for 6 additional years after the war ended because of administrative error. The workers moved toward the open doors slowly, cautiously. We emerged into the Underhive corridors. The space felt vast, dangerous. Several workers experienced panic responses. We had been conditioned to enclose space. Openness was now alien. The Arbites directed us to a processing center. We walked through the Underhive and I observed what had changed. New construction, destroyed buildings, scars of the war in bullet-marked walls and burned structures. The population that watched our passage looked confused and occasionally hostile. We were strange to them. We moved wrong. We were refugees in what had been our home. The processing center was a converted warehouse. Administratum personnel took our information, assigned temporary habitation, provided ration chits and identification documents. We were officially recognized as existing again. Keller stood beside me in the processing line. What do we do now? We adapt. To what? To whatever comes next. I don't know how to do anything except work line 12. Then you work line 12. The Manufactorum will restart. They'll need workers who know the systems. And that's it. We just go back. What else is there? He had no answer. The Manufactorum restarted operation 17 days after the doors opened. Most workers returned. We knew the machines. We knew the quotas. Outside was foreign. Inside was familiar. I returned to line 17. I could no longer operate directly, but I could supervise, could train new workers, could maintain quality control. The pattern resumed. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. I am 114 years old now. I have worked this Manufactorum for 96 years. I should be dead. I persist. Young Davan works line 17 now, 22 years old. Born in the Manufactorum, grew up in containment, returned after the doors opened. This is his entire world. The workers born during containment struggle with life outside. They experience environmental anxiety, fear of open spaces, inability to navigate without boundaries, psychological distress when separated from the group. They function best inside the Manufactorum's walls. They return each shift and something in them relaxes. They are damaged. We are all damaged. The Manufactorum consumed 40 years and produced workers who cannot exist anywhere else. I think about Davan frequently. The original. The one who died because the system calculated his life was worth less than medicine. I wonder what he would think about young Davan, about Killer, about the children born into imprisonment who have become adults who cannot leave. I think he would be angry. He maintained his anger until he died. He said anger meant being human. I lost my anger sometime during year 8 or 9. It faded so gradually I did not notice its absence until I tried to recall what it felt like and found nothing. I'm not angry about the 40 years. I'm not angry about the 6 additional years we spent contained because of administrative error. I'm not angry about the workers who died, the children born into imprisonment, the lives consumed by systematic indifference. I'm not angry because anger requires energy I do not have, requires belief that things could have been different, requires hope that systems might change. I have none of these things. I have only observation. I witnessed what occurred. I am recording it now because recording is all that remains. This is what the Imperium costs, not dramatic sacrifices or heroic deaths. The cost is this: 800 people locked in a factory for 40 years because it was convenient, children born who never saw the sun, workers who died because medicine was too expensive, 40 years of human lives converted into production quotas. And when it ended, when the doors finally opened, we walked back inside because we had been so thoroughly adapted to captivity that freedom was more terrifying than containment. We became what the system required. We processed ourselves. We optimized our own consumption. The Imperium did not need to force us. We collaborated in our own reduction to function because the alternative was death. And we chose to live, even if living meant becoming components. Davan told me not to let it make me just a function. I failed. I became exactly that. I am supervisor of Line 17. I am trainer of new workers. I am repository of institutional knowledge. I am not a person. I have not been a person since year 9, when the anger stopped and the processing began. But I remember being a person. I remember Davan's face perfectly. I remember choosing to share water. I remember sitting beside him while he died and counting the seconds between his final breaths. I remember these things with clarity that will not fade because they are the only evidence that I was once something more than the function I have become. This is my testimony. I worked line 17 of Manufacturum 66 Delta for 96 years. I was imprisoned for 40 of those years. I survived when I should have died. I maintained operation. I trained the next generation. I perpetuated the system that consumed me. The doors are open now. I could leave. I do not leave. I return each shift. I perform my function. The pattern holds. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The hydraulic press descends. Production continues. The Imperium continues. It always continues. We are fuel. We burn and we are replaced, and the machine persists. This is what I learned. The Imperium does not need to imprison us. We imprison ourselves. We return to our machines because our machines are all we understand. I am 114 years old. I will die soon. When I die, young Davan will take my position. He will train new workers. He will maintain the pattern. He will never leave because he was born inside and does not know how to exist outside. The cycle continues. The system persists. I recorded this testimony because Davan asked me not to become just a function. I failed that request completely, but I remembered it. Remembering is insufficient, but it is what remains. The doors are open. We do not leave. This is what we have become. The pattern holds.